My name is Margaret, and I will never forget the sound of my husband's laughter that night. Not because it was joyful, but because it was shared with another woman, his boss, while I was standing right there at his birthday dinner, holding a cake adorned with 58 candles and a lifetime of memories that suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else. The restaurant was warm and softly lit, one of those old Italian places with dark wood booths and wine bottles lining the walls. You could smell garlic butter and rosemary the moment you stepped in. It was the kind of restaurant where families go after Sunday service, where anniversaries are celebrated, where people toast to milestones. I had chosen it because I thought it would be special for him, comfortable, familiar, safe. I had no idea I was walking straight into the quiet shattering of a 32-year marriage. They were sitting too close in the corner of the long table. My husband Charles and his boss Evelyn. I'd met her before. She was polished in a way that spoke of inherited class, not effort. Platinum watch pearls blazer tailored to perfection. The kind of woman who speaks softly and still takes up the whole room. She was nearly 60 and beautiful in that seasoned, sharpened way that wealth sometimes makes a person. I used to admire it. But that night when I saw her hand resting lightly over my husband's, I didn't feel admiration. I felt understanding. An understanding that settled deep, heavy, but strangely calm. The chatter around the table blurred. His coworkers clinking glasses, his mother laughing too loudly, his sister talking about her new cruise plans. And then his mother leaned toward me. She had always held herself with an air of superiority, even when the family had nothing. Chin up, brows arched, as if she'd stepped out of some grand ballroom instead of the fabric store where she had worked for 40 years. She smelled of gardenia perfume, the same one she'd worn since I met her in 1991. She whispered almost kindly, like sharing a secret between women. "They look beautiful together, don't they? You understand what I'm saying, right?" Her words didn't stab, they simply confirmed. They confirmed what I had already known for weeks, maybe for months. I didn't cry, I didn't tremble, I didn't speak. I simply smiled. A small smile, polite, measured, the kind of smile you give when accepting condolences. I set the cake down gently and took my seat with quiet grace. And while they laughed, my husband and his boss leaning shoulder to shoulder, I reached into my purse and removed the envelope. White, plain, heavy. It was not dramatic, not theatrical. There was no gasp, no sudden silence. I simply slid it across the table to him like it was a birthday card. He looked confused at first, smiling in that charming way I once loved. Then he opened it. Inside were divorce papers. Already signed on my side, already filed, already notarized. The date of separation effective today. And attached something far more devastating than divorce. A financial report, a timeline of the affair, a witness statement from his boss's former assistant, and a prepared complaint for workplace misconduct ready to be submitted to his company's board. His face changed slowly. Confusion softened to understanding. Understanding sharpened to fear, and fear collapsed into raw panic. He whispered my name like a plea, like he was drowning and needed air. I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw a drink. I didn't give them the satisfaction of witnessing pain. I simply said, "Thank you all for coming tonight. I hope you enjoy the rest of the celebration." Then I picked up my coat and walked out of that warm restaurant into the cool, still night air. The parking lot smelled of pine and cold brick. A breeze brushed my face. I could hear faint laughter through the windows, muffled and distant. I got into my car, closed the door, sat in silence. 5 minutes passed. And then it happened. The restaurant doors burst open. His voice tore through the night. "Margaret, please, please don't leave, please." He was sobbing, not crying sobbing. A man who had built his identity on control had lost every inch of ground beneath him. His voice was animal desperate, unfamiliar. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't look back. I turned the key. The engine hummed soft and steady. As I drove away, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel rage. I felt something far simpler. I was done. But a moment like this doesn't come from nowhere. And if I'm going to tell you this story, if I'm going to tell it honestly, then I need to take you back. Back to when the cracks first formed. Back to the quiet betrayals that came long before the affair. Because marriages don't break in one night. They erode. And mine had been eroding for a very, very long time. I didn't marry a bad man. I need to say that first because stories like this are too easily flattened into heroes and villains, saints and snakes. Life isn't built that simply. I married a man who once upon a time brought me flowers he couldn't afford, who used to dance with me in the kitchen to the radio barefoot, the way young love makes ordinary things feel sacred. I married someone who held my hand at my father's funeral, someone who kissed me through the flu and the layoff we survived, and the lean years where we counted every grocery receipt twice. That's where stories like this get tangled. You don't lose something you never loved. Charles and I built a life the way most American couples of our generation did, slowly, practically sometimes clumsily. We bought a modest 3-bedroom ranch house with beige siding and a lawn he swore he'd keep green, though it mostly turned yellow every August. We raised 2 children in that house. We painted the nursery yellow for our daughter because we didn't have the ultrasound results yet. And I remember thinking how bright and hopeful that shade was on the walls. We lived a life, a real one, a shared one. But marriages don't fall apart all at once. They loosen, they fray. I started noticing the small things first. Not the cliché lipstick on a collar things, not perfume or late-night texts followed by excuses. No, Charles was more careful than that. Or maybe he was more cowardly. The first change was silence. The kind that settles in the kitchen while 2 people drink coffee and say nothing, even though they used to talk about everything. The way he started sitting in the living room at night, watching news broadcasts, with the volume just a little too loud instead of sitting beside me on the couch like he used to. The way he started eating meals with his shoulders slightly turned away from me, like his body already knew something his mind refused to admit. Then came the gym membership, at 54, to stay in shape for work events. Now men can decide to take care of themselves at any age, and that's a good thing. But it wasn't the exercise. It was the urgency. The sudden purchase of fitted shirts. The new cologne that cost more than any cologne he'd worn in the 30 years I knew him. The way he started tucking in his shirt differently, standing differently, speaking differently, voice smooth, confident, practiced. He began traveling more. Conferences, board meetings, networking dinners. I never demanded details. Not because I was naive, but because I have never believed in chasing someone who intends to walk away. Then his mother started calling more frequently. She never liked me, not truly. I was too quiet, too sensible, too aged by responsibility, as though motherhood wasn't supposed to age you. She liked women who performed femininity, like theater soft voices, big jewelry laughter that floated like perfume. And she adored Evelyn, his boss. Such a refined woman, she'd say. So poised, so successful. The first time she said, she's the kind of woman who elevates the man beside her, I felt something inside me shift. Not break, just shift. I remember sitting on the porch one evening, watching the light fade behind the maple tree across the street. The neighborhood kids were riding scooters, and the sprinklers were ticking rhythmically. Normal life. And yet, inside me, a quiet certainty formed. He was gone long before he physically left. But I didn't confront him. I didn't scream. I didn't ask who or why or when. Because I knew that anger would give him something. Attention, drama, a stage to claim victimhood later. Instead, I began observing, tracking small details. I didn't even realize I was doing it at first. But patterns emerge when you stop trying to believe the story someone is selling you. He'd say he was in Charlotte. His credit card statement would show dinner in Greenville. He'd say he was in a hotel. The hotel invoice would list 2 guests. He'd say his phone battery died. But the screenshots of his text logs told a different story. The thing about truth is, it doesn't hide well. One night, I found him asleep with his phone unlocked on the nightstand. He had fallen asleep watching TV, his hand resting lightly on his chest, the way he had slept next to me for decades. I didn't scroll, I didn't snoop. I simply saw one message glowing on the screen like a lighthouse beam. I miss the way you look at me when no one else is around. Not I miss you, not I love you, but the way you look at me. That's not romance, that's ego. That is the addiction to being adored. And I understood something then. This wasn't about love. It was about validation. About being wanted by someone glittering and admired someone who made him feel powerful. So I protected myself. I reached out to our old friend Harold, who had gone into family law after retiring from teaching. He had known us since we were newlyweds. When I told him, he didn't look surprised. He looked sad. We sat in his office surrounded by framed photos of his grandchildren and diplomas that had faded gently over the years. He spoke softly, like one speaks to someone recovering from a long illness. "We're going to do this the right way. The quiet way, the dignified way." That was when the slow work began. The invisible work, the gathering, the preparing. The steady reclaiming of my life while he was too busy chasing someone else's reflection to notice. Looking back, I don't think Charles meant to hurt me. But he did. Because he didn't look for me anymore. And a marriage cannot survive being unseen. What happened at the birthday dinner wasn't sudden. It was simply the moment the truth was finally spoken aloud. When people tell stories about betrayal, they often imagine the moment of discovery as loud doors slammed, voices raised, accusations hurled. But real betrayal, the kind that grows slowly inside a married home, is quieter than that. It is the sound of someone turning away in the dark. It is the small space between two bodies lying in the same bed. It is the way a fork touches a plate at dinner too softly. I did not scream. I did not demand answers. I did not tear through drawers or clothes or pockets. I simply accepted what was true. And once you accept truth, you begin to act with clarity. The next morning, I called Harold again. I still remember the exact way he answered the phone, steady, professional, but tinged with concern. "Come by around 2, he said. We'll begin." His office was in an old brick building downtown, the kind with creaking floors and tall windows that look out over the courthouse lawn. The clock in the hallway chimed the half hour as I walked in. Harold sat behind his desk glasses low on his nose, tapping his pen thoughtfully against a stack of organized files. He didn't ask if I was sure. He didn't ask me to reconsider. He simply laid out the steps. "We build slowly," he said. "No sudden moves, no accusations, no emotional confrontations. We get the documents, we create a timeline, we secure your finances. And when we are done, Margaret, he doesn't get the chance to rewrite the story." I nodded. I felt very calm, perhaps calmer than I had felt in years. The first step was financial. Most people don't realize that money leaves a trail longer and more honest than words ever will. Charles had always been the one who filed our taxes, paid the bills, handled our investments. I had trusted him with that. Trust is a beautiful thing until the day it becomes a weakness someone exploits. Harold guided me through accessing account records, shared accounts first, then retirement portfolios, then employer-based investment programs. We downloaded statements, highlighted transfers, noted dates. There were no dramatic discoveries, no secret offshore accounts, no hotel charges under fake names. It was simpler dinners billed to the company that weren't work-related. Airline tickets purchased for 2 under his corporate travel allowance. Luxury lunches at a private golf club neither of us belonged to. These things alone did not break a marriage, but they painted a story, a believable one. The second step was documenting the affair itself, not just emotionally, but legally. Because truth to matter has to be verifiable. This part did not involve invading privacy. I didn't hack his phone. I didn't read private journals. Instead, I gathered what was left in plain sight. Photos from corporate charity galas where they stood closer than coworkers stand. His calendar entries that matched hotel reservation records. Text messages that came through our phone bill recorded not the content, but the frequency and timestamps. The pattern spoke clearly. But the final piece came from someone unexpected. Her name was Allison. She had been Evelyn's assistant, bright, polite, and 15 years younger than either of them. I remembered seeing her once or twice at work, events always kind, always observant. Harold encouraged me to reach out not to ask for gossip, but to ask for clarity. We met in a quiet cafe on Main Street, the one with mismatched mugs and soft jazz playing from a speaker near the pastry case. She stirred honey into her tea with slow, careful movements. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she said, "but I also believe in truth." She told me what I already knew, but hearing it made it real in a way documentation never could. It had started slowly. Business dinners, project planning, late-night calls. It had grown into something physical. But the real betrayal wasn't the affair. It was the way Evelyn spoke about it, as though it were a project. Something strategic, something she believed she had earned. She called it conquering, Allison said, looking away ashamed on someone else's behalf. That was the moment something inside me hardened not with anger, but with finality. The affair wasn't romantic, it wasn't tragic, it wasn't impulsive. It was opportunistic, and my husband had chosen to be conquered. Allison agreed to write a statement, not dramatic, not emotional, simply factual. Dates, times, observations. Enough to be credible. Enough to protect me. Enough to strip away any possible denial. Harold took all of it and assembled the envelope. Thick, heavy, professional. There was no flourish, no exaggeration. It was precise. Inside, he placed the divorce petition already signed by me. A fair and equal division of assets. Documentation of the affair tied directly to professional misconduct. And instructions for immediate separation. There was no vengeance in the papers. No punishment. Just truth. Truth is a clean blade. It cuts once and then it's done. For weeks, I carried the envelope in my purse. Not because I planned to use it quickly, but because the moment had to be right. Revenge, if one insists on calling it that, is not effective when rushed. It must be timed. I waited. I waited while he came home late. I waited while he rehearsed excuses I didn't challenge. I waited while he asked me why I was so quiet lately. I waited while he kissed me on the cheek like a brother greeting a sister. I waited until a moment so public, so casual, so ordinary that no one could rewrite it later. His birthday dinner, where his mother whispered poison sweet as frosting, where they thought I would crumble quietly, where they believed I still needed them. But I had already left him emotionally. The envelope simply signed the paperwork on a departure long underway. Preparing wasn't dramatic. Preparing was dignified. Preparing was reclaiming myself. And that is why when I handed him that envelope, I did not tremble. I was already gone. The night of the party felt strangely ordinary at first. The sky was clear, a late spring blue that softened into gold as the sun lowered over the neighborhood. I remember standing at the kitchen counter, tying a ribbon around the bakery box that held his cake. It was chocolate with cream frosting, his favorite, since the first birthday I celebrated with him, when we were both too young and too broke to buy anything more special than a grocery store sheet cake. Funny how traditions hold, even when love does not. I placed the cake gently in the passenger seat and drove to the restaurant. The radio played softly, one of those oldies stations that never changed, always promising the comfort of familiar songs. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't rehearsing what I would say. The decision had already been made. I was simply carrying it out. When I walked into the restaurant, the scene was already in motion. The long wooden table was half filled, people laughing, wine glasses clinking, the warm glow of the hanging lights casting everything in soft amber. I could have been a guest in anyone's celebration. Charles saw me first. He smiled wide, that smile that once used to make me feel chosen. Now it just felt practiced. He stood and came around the table to take the cake from my hands, kissing me lightly on the cheek. The kind of kiss you give out of habit. His mother, Margaret Sr., though she insisted everyone call her Marge, waved me over and patted the seat beside her. I sat. She smelled of gardenia like always. Her jewelry clinked softly as she leaned in and took my hand in hers. "You look tired," she said, but not with concern, with judgment. I just smiled politely. Then Evelyn entered. She arrived late, deliberately late, the kind of entrance a person makes when they know they will be noticed. She wore deep navy pearls and confidence. I watched her walk toward the table, watched my husband's posture change shoulders, pulling back jaw-tightening eyes, brightening in a way he had not looked at me for years, not because of beauty, but because desire is often about being reflected, admired, seen. And she made him feel seen. She took the seat next to him, too close. Their shoulders brushed when they leaned forward to speak. Their fingers lingered near each other's wine glasses. Maybe the others didn't notice. Or maybe they pretended not to. The world is full of people who look away when truth walks into the room. The conversation rose and fell around me like waves, meaningless chatter about work, upcoming summer travel plans, new patio renovations, cholesterol medication adjustments. I remember thinking how astonishing it was that life could appear so normal while something so monumental was happening inside my chest. Then came the whisper. His mother leaned in her lips, nearly brushing my ear. Her voice was soft, sweetened like a compliment, but shaped like a blade. "They look beautiful together, don't they?"
You understand what I'm saying, right? A better match.
I didn't respond immediately. I let her words settle. Let her believe she had delivered something clever. Let her feel powerful. Then I turned my head slowly to look at her.
And I smiled.
Not a forced smile, not a wounded smile.
A knowing smile.
The kind that says I already left this room emotionally, and you don't even know it. I could see the confusion flicker across her face, just for a second. Then I reached into my purse. The envelope felt cool between my fingers, smooth, heavy. I placed it in front of Charles with gentle clarity, as if handing him the check at the end of a meal. He blinked. He looked at me, searching for context, for instruction. "Just open it," I said quietly. He did. He pulled out the documents one sheet at a time, the sound of paper sliding against itself, startlingly loud in the soft-lit room. His expression shifted in stages: confusion to disbelief to panic. His breath caught. His eyes darted to Evelyn, then to his mother, then back to me. "Margaret, what is this?" he whispered. His voice was small, frightened, like a child who had been caught doing something unforgivable. I didn't answer. He flipped another page. The affidavits, the timeline, the board complaint. His hand shook. Then Evelyn reached for the papers. He pulled them away. Too late. She had seen enough. Her practiced elegance faltered. Her jaw tightened. Her breath stilled. His mother reached over, reading the first page, and her face drained of its warmth. Her voice, when it came, was a hiss.
"What have you done?"
Not to her son. To me. As though the betrayal was mine. I stood, slowly, without rush. "I didn't do anything," I said. "I just stopped pretending." The table fell silent.
Forks paused. Conversations halted. The air itself seemed to hold its breath.
I picked up my purse, slipped my coat over my arm, smoothed the fabric of my blouse, and I said, "Thank you all for coming tonight. Enjoy the rest of the celebration."
Then I walked out.
No tears, no shaking, no looking back.
The night air was crisp and the sky was deepening into dusk. Cars drove by, laughter spilled from the restaurant patio. The world didn't know it had changed, but I did.
I sat in my car, folded my hands in my lap, and breathed.
5 minutes later, the restaurant doors burst open. Charles stumbled out, voice cracking, choking, pleading. "Please, Margaret, please don't go. Please, please."
I didn't move. I didn't speak. I started the engine. As I pulled away, I saw him in the rearview mirror, knees buckling, hands to his face. Some people think revenge is about destruction. But the most powerful revenge is simply leaving. Leaving with dignity. Leaving on your terms. Leaving when the other person realizes what they have lost and cannot get back. I drove home alone, and the silence felt like freedom. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It rarely does. Public scenes make for dramatic stories, but real consequences unfold slowly, like a structure that has been rotting from the inside for years and finally begins to crumble under its own weight.
After the birthday dinner, I didn't go home. I drove to my sister's house, Ruth. She lived about 20 minutes away, in a quiet cul-de-sac lined with maple trees and carefully trimmed hedges. Her porch light was always on after sunset, not because she was waiting for someone, but because she believed a home should always look welcoming. That night, when she opened the door and saw me standing there with my coat still draped over my arm, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me in and wrapped her arms around me.
We sat in her living room. The lamp in the corner cast a soft, warm glow, the same one that had for years illuminated Christmas stockings, late-night card games, and sleepy cups of tea. I told her everything, not dramatically, not rushed, but simply factually. Ruth listened, her face calm, her hands folded in her lap. She had always been the quiet strength in our family. When I finished, she exhaled slowly and said, "You did the right thing. You did it the right way." I slept in her guest room that night under a quilt our mother had sewn decades ago. I don't remember dreaming. I just remember the extraordinary lightness in my chest, as though I had been carrying a weight for years and only then realized I could put it down. The next morning, my phone had 13 missed calls and 7 voicemails from Charles. I didn't listen to them. I deleted them without opening. Listening would have made me responsible for his pain, and I was no longer responsible for managing his emotions. By noon, his tone had changed from begging to bargaining. He texted, Can we talk, please? Just talk. I did not respond. By evening, the tone shifted again from bargaining to anger. I can't believe you would humiliate me like that. We could have handled this privately. Do you realize what you've done to my career? Yes, I did, but he had done it first. When men are caught, they don't mourn the loss of love, they mourn the loss of control. Meanwhile, the professional consequences began quietly. Harold had timed everything perfectly. The envelope didn't just serve my departure, it served a purpose to force accountability. The company's HR department received the documentation the next morning, along with the timeline the assistant's signed statement and copies of the travel expenses. Within 2 days, Charles was placed on administrative leave while the investigation proceeded. The wealthy boss, Evelyn, found herself under review as well, not for the romance itself, but for the misuse of company funds and unethical conduct in promoting and favoring him. Corporate punishment is not loud. It unfolds in memos, closed-door meetings, and polite phrases that are sharp as razors. Temporary leave pending further evaluation, reputational risk, breach of fiduciary expectation, potential conflict of interest. Meanwhile, his mother called me. Her voice was shaky, not with regret, but with desperation. Margaret, you didn't have to do this. Families stay together. Women work through these things. I let her finish before I said calmly, You taught him those rules, not me. She hung up. Days passed, then a week. Charles finally requested a meeting through Harold. A neutral location. A quiet office conference room with glass walls and a fake plant in the corner. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally. Shoulders drawn inward, eyes tired. He had lost something he had taken for granted, the steadiness of being chosen. He tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to arrange excuses into something that resembled a narrative. I didn't mean for it to happen. I felt unseen. I didn't know how to talk to you. It just happened. I listened, quietly, without reacting. When he finished, he looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Recognition, not of me, but of the truth. He finally saw that I had loved him quietly, faithfully, steadily, and he had mistaken that steadiness for something guaranteed. I said simply, I forgive you. He looked startled. He hadn't earned forgiveness, he knew that. But forgiveness wasn't for him. Forgiveness was letting myself close the door without locking it from the inside. But I continued, forgiveness doesn't mean return. His face broke slowly like something fragile cracking from the center. He whispered, I never thought you would leave. I nodded. That was your mistake. The legal process moved forward without spectacle. The divorce was finalized in under 3 months, cleanly, fairly, no dramatic arguments over furniture or sentimental objects. I took the house, he took his car. The retirement accounts were split. Our children, grown and independent, supported me quietly without needing to take sides. They had seen the erosion too. As for Evelyn, her downfall was not theatrical. She wasn't fired immediately. Wealth and influence cushioned the fall, but she was quietly removed from public-facing roles. Invitations to speak at conferences evaporated. Committees restructured without her. Privilege can delay consequences, but it cannot delete them. And Charles found himself adrift not just without his job, but without his reflection. He had defined himself through how someone else looked at him. And now there was no gaze to hold him steady. I did not hate him, but I no longer loved him either. What remained was something like sorrow, but gentler. Time passed. Seasons changed. One afternoon months later, I saw him in the grocery store standing in front of the apples. He looked older, not in his face, but in his posture. He saw me. He didn't approach. He didn't speak. He simply nodded. A small, quiet nod that carried every unspoken apology. I nodded back. Not warmly, not coldly, just truthfully. The collapse was complete. And life continued. House felt different once he was gone. Not empty, just quiet in a way that felt neither lonely nor comforting at first, but simply unfamiliar. I would walk through the living room in the early mornings, when the sun comes in low and golden through the east-facing window, and I would stand there for a moment, hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant call of mourning doves outside. It was the kind of quiet you have to learn how to live in. For decades, my life had been arranged around someone else's schedule. His business trips, his preferences, his moods. I learned to anticipate before being asked. It happens to many marriages. One person expands, and the other person adjusts their shape around them. You don't realize you've made yourself smaller until the space you once filled opens back up. So at first, I didn't rush to fill it. I took my mornings slowly. I cleaned the house not out of resentment or ritual, but to make it mine again. I donated old clothes, old keepsakes, old habits. I rearranged the living room furniture, not drastically, just enough to make the space feel like it had turned a page. I planted herbs in the kitchen window, basil, rosemary, mint. Just small things, but fragrant, alive, and forgiving to beginners. Then I started going for walks again. Long ones without purpose or timeline. Past the elementary school where my children once learned spelling and fractions. Past the park where we used to bring picnic blankets and plastic containers of pasta salad. Past the library where I had once spent Saturday mornings reading to toddlers during story hour, back when time felt abundant and my body felt strong. Life hadn't ended. It had just rearranged itself. One Thursday afternoon, I stopped at that same library. The building was still the same, the brick facade, the steps worn smooth by decades of feet, the quiet hush that always greeted you past the threshold. I walked inside and felt something loosen in my chest, a sense of home that had been waiting for me to return. I didn't go there with a purpose, but life has a way of opening doors when you are ready to walk through them. A volunteer coordinator, a lovely woman named Dorothy with silver hair pinned into a bun, noticed me standing near the community board. "We're always looking for helpers for the literacy program," she said gently. "You have the kind of face that children would trust."
I laughed softly. I hadn't thought about my face that way in years. So I signed up.
Just one afternoon a week at first. Helping older kids with reading comprehension, helping younger ones sound out vowels, helping teenagers write personal statements for college applications. And somewhere in those small moments, listening to stumbling voices gain confidence, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time.
Myself.
Not the wife, not the wronged woman, not the quiet one who endured. Just me. Meanwhile, word of what happened between Charles and Evelyn made its way through social circles, not through me, because I did not speak of it, but through the natural way truth circulates when people try too hard to hide it. No one confronted me. No one asked directly, but I noticed subtle shifts. People at church approaching me with a softness in their eyes. Neighbors lingering a little longer when waving hello friends sending texts that simply said, "Thinking of you," without needing details. Even his mother changed, slowly and awkwardly, and without knowing how to say the words. She called me one afternoon. Not to apologize, she wasn't built for apology. But her voice had lost the sharp, triumphant edge it once held. "I'm getting older, Margaret," she said. "It's harder to get up the stairs these days."
I understood what she was really saying. I told her I could help her find a caretaker. Someone kind, someone patient, someone who would meet her needs. I didn't say I'll take care of you. That would have been dishonest. The wound between us was real, and forgiveness does not require return to closeness.
But compassion does not require forgetting. She seemed relieved, and grateful, and quiet. That was enough.
As for Charles, life humbled him and then softened him. He sold the house he had moved into after the divorce, downsized, changed jobs twice. Each change brought him a little closer to reality, a little farther from the illusion he had been chasing.
We didn't speak often, not because we were enemies, but because we were finished. Occasionally, we exchanged polite updates about the children, and once or twice about mutual friends. He no longer tried to rewrite the past. There was dignity in that, finally. One late autumn afternoon, nearly a year after the divorce, he asked to meet. We sat on a bench in the park, leaves drifting down around us like gentle reminders that life sheds what no longer serves it. He looked older, softer around the edges, like stone worn smooth by water. He told me he was sorry, not dramatically, not to win anything back. Just quietly, truthfully. And I believed him.
I told him I hoped he would find peace.
We didn't hug, we didn't cry. We just sat together a moment. Two people who had once shared a life, now sharing only a memory. And it was enough. Because healing, I've learned, is not about going back. It is about going forward without bitterness. It is about choosing gentleness for yourself when someone else chose carelessness. It is about understanding that forgiveness is not reopening a door. It is simply setting down the weight of what you carried. And I had set it down.
I had placed it in the past and walked forward into a life that was quieter, steadier, smaller in some ways, but deeply, deeply mine. A full year passed, the kind of year that feels both long and fleeting, like a season you lived inside without realizing you had moved from one stage of yourself into another. Time does that, reshapes us quietly.
The house had settled into its new rhythm. The rooms no longer echoed with absence. They simply felt lived in, steady, carried by my own movement now. I had learned to enjoy eating dinner by the window, watching the neighborhood at dusk. Families walking dogs. Teenagers riding bikes home before the porch lights flicked on. The gentle turn of days, ordinary and precious in ways I once overlooked. I began spending more time in the garden. The herbs in the kitchen window had flourished, and I expanded outward tomatoes, lavender, marigold. A climbing rose that I trained up a wooden trellis. I learned the patience of pruning, of mulching, of trusting seeds to sprout when they were ready, and not a moment sooner. It was grounding work, the kind that does not demand perfection, only presence.
The library tutoring continued too. I saw some of the same children each week, their confidence blooming like spring flowers. There was a little girl named Rose who used to whisper every answer, afraid to be wrong. One afternoon she read a full page out loud. Clear, steady, her eyes shining with pride. I felt something inside me, warm, a quiet kind of joy. A reminder that growth is always possible, for all of us.
Sometimes when I lay in bed at night, I would think about the woman I had been before the one who carried the weight of keeping a marriage together. I did not resent her. She loved in the way she understood how. She stayed because she believed stability was the same thing as happiness. She fought quietly. She endured.
But I no longer needed to endure.
I had grown into a life where I didn't have to make myself small, so someone else could feel big. Where my value was not measured by how little I needed or how much I could hold together. Where I didn't have to be the constant caretaker of another person's emotional shadows. The truth is, leaving wasn't the revenge. The revenge was flourishing. Not loudly, not spitefully, just steadily.
One afternoon in late spring, I received a call from Charles. He spoke carefully, as though he didn't want to disturb the balance we had arrived at.
His mother Marge had fallen. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to shake her. Age does that too, reminds us gently, then urgently that life is fragile. He asked if I would come by the house to help sort through her medications and paperwork. She trusted my practicality more than any caretaker, he said. And I went. The house felt smaller than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally. Walls that once felt like battlegrounds now felt more like the remains of an old story. Marge sat in her armchair, wrapped in a knitted throw. Her face looked softer, less guarded. Age has a way of sanding down sharp edges. She looked at me with eyes that once judged me, measured me, compared me. This time they simply saw me. I was wrong, she said. Just that, only that. Not a performance, not a plea. Just a truth that had taken a lifetime to learn. I nodded. I didn't need her to explain. I didn't need her to detail what part she regretted. Some truths are shared without needing to be spoken. I organized her medications. I labeled the pill bottles. I arranged appointment reminders and helped set up a delivery service. Practical kindness. Human kindness. When I stood to leave, she reached for my hand, not gripping, not holding me there, just resting her palm lightly over mine.
"Thank you," she whispered.
I squeezed her hand gently. "You're welcome." Charles walked me out to the porch. The air was warm, the kind that promises summer without heaviness. He stood there for a moment, as though searching for words that didn't wound either of us. "You look happy," he finally said. "I am," I answered. Not boastful, not triumphant, simply true. He nodded, looking down at his hands. "I used to think you stayed because you needed me," he said. "I didn't understand that you stayed because you loved me." I didn't respond, not because I didn't have words, but because the moment didn't ask for them. He took a slow breath. "I hope you know, I did love you. I just lost myself somewhere along the way." I looked at him, and I saw not the man who betrayed me, not the man who begged in a parking lot, not the man who crumbled when his world collapsed. I saw the young man he had once been the one who danced with me in kitchens and laughed under streetlights and believed life would always be simpler than it turned out to be. And I felt something like peace. I know, I said. We didn't hug, we didn't cry. We simply shared a moment of mutual understanding, an ending without bitterness. I walked to my car. The gardenias were blooming along the fence line. The sky was wide and open.
As I drove home, I realized something important.
The story was not about betrayal, nor revenge, nor loss. It was about choosing myself and doing it with grace.
It was about learning that love does not justify self-erasure. That loyalty without reciprocity is not devotion, it is abandonment of self. That forgiveness is not returning, it is releasing. And that starting over is not a failure. It is a continuation of who we have always been becoming. If you are listening to this and carrying something heavy pain betrayal, loneliness, confusion, I want to say this gently from one human heart to another. You deserve a life where you are seen, where your voice echoes inside your own home, where your love is reciprocated, not just received. If this story meant something to you, if it made you feel understood, if it reminded you of your own strength, then stay with me. There are more stories to tell, more hearts to soothe, more quiet victories to witness. You're not alone.